All right, welcome everyone. It's a great turnout. I feel like it's a bit of a rock concert, so I hope you enjoy. Welcome to IFP's Industry Connect. I'm Danielle DiGiacomo, Community Manager at IFP. I'm going to keep it brief, just to tell you that Industry Connect is a quarterly program that IFP puts on for its members, a panel followed by a reception. And if you want to know more about IFP or join, there is a membership table in the back. Without further ado, I will introduce Sarah Lash, who is Head of Acquisitions at ATO Pictures. And thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. We have a terrific panel tonight, and I will let everyone introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their sort of day-to-day role in the indie financing world and how it affects their positions. Jason Orans.
Hello. I'm an independent producer in New York, so I guess I'm giving the independent producer standpoint, I guess like a lot of you. My last film, Night Catches Us, premiered in competition at Sundance this year. I've had a film last year at Sundance as well in competition called Dare, and a film called Goodbye Solo that came out before then that got into theaters, and so did Dare. I guess that's why I'm here.
I'm Milton Tabbot. I'm Senior Director of Programming at IFP. And I guess the reason I'm on this panel primarily is at the IFP I do a lot of work with projects that are still in development and production, and primarily my side, documentaries. And I also run the fiscal sponsorship program at IFP, which for those of you who don't know, I can explain later if you have questions. But I work directly with filmmakers as they're trying to raise their money, primarily through individuals and through great foundations such as Cinereach. So that's me.
Hi, I'm Adella Ladjevardi. I'm the grants manager at Cinereach, an independent organization that funds independent documentary and fiction films.
Hey, I'm Yancey Strickler. I'm the co-founder of Kickstarter. Kickstarter is a crowdfunding website for the arts and for creative projects, and film has been a big part of our first 9 months.
Right. So I thought it would be interesting to actually look to you guys first, so we're not talking in a vacuum up here. And I'm going to choose 3 or 4 people from the audience, people who are actively looking for production financing for an active project. And I'd like you to tell me the budget of your project, the status of your financing, you have X amount in place, and if it's from different sources, what the source is, and if you've looked at alternative sources of financing. And just please keep it brief. I just thought it would be interesting if we had some real-life scenarios to touch upon as we're talking up here. And if someone who I choose to speak gives a scenario that's almost exactly the same as yours, please let someone else give some other scenarios so we have a diverse cross-section of things to touch upon. So, you're right there.
My name is Hector, and I've got a film that I wrote and shot in Burma, in Myanmar, and it's a feature narrative. I had, the budget is about, a total of about $650,000, mostly from private sources here in the States and elsewhere. I had all my funding lined up until just recently one of my funders from Japan pulled out. So I got the film shot, I've got it edited, and I'm just, we got to take it to post-production facility in Bangkok. So I'm now at a point where I need funding for the
just post,
stage.
Right.
And so at this point in the game, other than private individuals who have canvassed everywhere, where do I go?
Okay, all right, all duly noted. You in the white shirt?
Hi, I have a short film that deals with suicide, and it's about $10,000 is where our budget is about, and raised about $2,000 through various Facebook friends and PayPal and whatnot. We're looking to just get the rest of that, and any additional would be toward putting in festivals.
Okay. And the tan coat? Yeah.
Hi, Oh, sorry. Hi. I don't know if I'm out of place. I'm from a news background. Everybody else here seems to be all these great film creative people. But I'm working on a documentary which I'm partnering with the United Nations on women in peacekeeping and the impact war has had on them and their countries, and how the UN Resolution 1325 has helped them in terms of allowing them to have a voice. My problem is that there are a lot of people interested in funding it, but there is a lot of political issues, a lot of politics playing out, whereas UN DPKO, Department of Peacekeeping Operations, they may want to fund it. There are women's issues involved, so UNIFEM is interested in funding it, but they don't want to fund something that's going to give DPKO all the credit. UN Foundation is interested, but then there are political issues with them and the UN and so on. So there are lots of interested people, but politics is playing a part, and that could hinder it.
All right, and what's your budget?
60,000.
60,000, okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Thanks.
And then one more in the back corner.
Second. Hello, my name is Tunji Alade. I'm working on my first independent feature. It's entitled Love Me. It's a psychological drama about a New York fashion photographer. I'm a writer, actor, director. I just finished the budget, which is $12.5 million. And it's a package, post-production, production, everything. It's all part of the budget.
And do you have have you reached out to any prospective financiers yet, or are you just starting?
The producer of Sling Blade.
Okay. All right. All right, so we can, the five of us up here will, maybe touch upon these case studies as we're talking throughout the panel. I thought that it would also be another good starting point would be for each of these guys up here to talk about a successful case study of independent film financing. I know there's a lot of doom and gloom in the trades, in the financing and independent film community, but there are occasional bright spots. Films are still getting made, but as everyone here is, I'm sure, aware or will soon learn, it helps to be extremely resourceful and smart and persistent about how you pull together your financing. So I'm operating under the assumption that there are at least 4 success stories up here, maybe we can talk about just specific scenarios, but each of these guys has produced films or had a significant role in producing a film. So I will pass it over to Jason.
All right. Well, the first one that seems pretty doable, Hector, your film, you said that you need to send it over to a Bangkok post-production house?
Yeah, we've already negotiated rates with them. They gave us really low rates.
Oh, so you're looking for the money to do the post there?
Yeah, we need
I see.
$80,000 for them.
Yeah. I missed that. Because I was going to suggest that, given, on the one hand, this is, I keep having this conversation over and over again with people. Right now is, it is one of the worst times you could ever be raising funds for film, whether it's post-production or for production. It just is. However, conversely, and it's a really positive thing, and I think it's really important, especially for independent filmmakers, to always think about the positives, is that it's an unbelievably great time to make an independent film right now, because there's certainly in New York right now, everybody's out of work, and that's just cyclical. Nobody makes movies in New York in the winter, and I always counsel people when they want to make a low-budget movie, I'm like, well, make it in the winter. Don't make it in the fall. Everyone wants Harry Met Sally or whatever, that look. So right now, there's a lot of post-production houses that are, that the rooms are just empty. And it used to be that, us resourceful indies would go, okay, we'll do our, we'll cut the movie at night and we'll do the color correct at night or whatever it took. Well, now during the day, it's empty. And, this is a good time to go in there. And if they believe in the project and say, look, people are interested in Burma now. It is, a growing thing in the world. It wasn't Burma VJ just nominated for an Oscar?
Ours is narrative. It'll be the first one released internationally ever.
I'd go see that. I mean, and I think that there's a lot of people really interested, and maybe figure out a way to throw in, if you can get them into did you shoot it in Burma?
Yeah.
Wow, you have to tell us how you did that another time. But, I think that there are people that might be interested in that, and you might be able to work out some kind of an in-kind deal with them, where they take an equity position in your film, like an investment, for the value of their goods, probably plus some, because post-production funding comes in usually in a last in, first out type of scenario. And they may demand that, and it depends on your other investors and whether they can live with that. But I mean, I would think the answer would not, unfortunately, unless there's post people in Bangkok would do it on an in-kind basis. My suggestion is to hit, you have, I'm sure, some kind of little reel cut for the film, and I would just go to every single post-production house around and see who's passionate about it and who would be willing to do it on an in-kind basis.
I was waiting for the success story, but
Is that your way of dodging that?
Oh, I also
Yeah.
had to kick in with the success story?
Yes, that's the main thing right now.
Oh, I see. I thought we were going after each of these. Success story. I mean, all I can tell you is that certainly there are people out there who are passionate about films. I can think of the last film, this one, Night Catches Us, that premiered at Sundance. This was a film that had been kicking around since 1999, a script that was. And, the director just stayed with it and persevered and, found a single investor, last year. And
Very rare these days.
yeah, but it was a single investor who loved it and wanted to establish his company and had money. And, you're talking about a time, the lesson learned is most people would have given up. Right? You take a movie through the Sundance Lab in 1999. I mean, a lot of people by the time 2004 rolls around or 2005 would have just moved on to another project. And this was somebody who would not take no for an answer and ends up making their movie and premiering in competition at Sundance in whatever year it is, 2010. That's great.
I was delaying a little because I don't have one particular success story. Because for a lot of the films that I work with, they're documentaries, and they are. It takes a continual hustling and raising money from all kinds of different sources. Rarely from investors, because documentaries don't make that much money. But of the two of the projects that mention their financing status here now, seem to me very easily fundable depending on your approach. So the short that you were talking about, not a lot of people will invest in shorts as an investment opportunity, but through, and Yancey might talk about this too, but certainly through something like fiscal sponsorship, we sponsor a lot of shorts who primarily the filmmakers looking to create a calling card, or if they're a narrative film, they're trying to show what they can do, and those the kind of things that we sponsor, and that you can get if you know enough people. The budget that you mentioned is fundable, depending on how you position the project and approach people, because they can get a charitable deduction if they go through a 501c3 that's sponsoring your film. On the UN project, I know some of the UN departments quite well, and I know what you're talking about. But if you're wanting to make that film, having those particular partners. Yes, you're going to keep running into delays with who wants to control what. I would always advise a documentary filmmaker to try to not strike any of those alliances, but have them as ultimate kind of supporters and outreach type partners rather than controlling your content. Because the film you're talking about, the women's issues related to the Millennium Goals, is another kind of social issue documentary at a very low, is it a short or a feature longer length? Yeah, That's a very relatively low budget in the documentary world that is easily fundable through various sources who are interested in either women's issues, primarily through all kinds of grants, and individuals too who would support you without having to getting that approval from various departments. But I wouldn't look to fund it that way through the UN.
So I just wanted to mention that I left handouts on everyone's chair. I guess I didn't have enough for all of you back there standing in the back. So I would recommend going to our website. There's a blog post. It's basically a one sheet of do's and don'ts and some tips on Cinereach funding. We're unique in that we fund both fiction and nonfiction feature-length films. We don't fund shorts. So for that gentleman back there, he would not be eligible to apply for a grant. We fund from all stages of the filmmaking process, research and development through post-production, and distribution, although less on the distribution and outreach side. We mostly fund documentaries, but we have been known to fund fiction films, and because the financing structures are very different, and the budgets are very different, the approaches are very different in terms of which projects we'll fund and which we won't.
What's your website?
Cinereach.org.
Adella, can you give a very general overview of what makes Cinereach different in terms of how, because your funding is referred to as a grant.
Right.
So how is that different from equity or other types of financing that filmmakers might be pursuing?
Okay, so Cinereach is a granting organization. We have 2 grant cycles a year, and in each grant cycle we have $250,000 that we give away to filmmakers. It's soft money, it's not a loan. You don't need to pay us back. All you need is to have a fiscal sponsor in place, like IFP as an organization, and we can channel the funds through that organization. So we don't do any investments. So for fiction films, funding on the production end, it gets a little tricky and complicated because most fiction films raise through equity, and mixing grant money with equity becomes a problem with fiscal sponsorship. Maybe yes. Milton can speak about that a little bit, but yeah. So we give out grants.
And what is the largest grant you'll give?
They range from, the range is from 5 to 50,000. Although right now the average is about 15 to 25,000 per project. And on this one sheet, it says in our most recent cycle, we had 900 applications, letters of inquiry. We invited 77 projects to submit full proposals, and we'll probably grant to about 10 to 12 projects. So it's very competitive.
Thanks. Yancey? Oh, yeah, and if you can talk about a success story that you guys were involved with.
There are a lot of films that are coming out this year. Recent success stories, we gave a grant to October Country that was playing at the IFC Theater these past couple weeks. That was a documentary. Entre Nos is a fiction film, came through us through Tribeca All Access, and they were touring the festival circuit. The idea is that we're not going to fund a full film. We're seed money, but the most successful applicants are ones that fit our mandate and that have sample footage. And that I can't stress how important that is because it's so competitive. Anyone can have a digital camera. It's pretty cheap to have a good digital camera these days. Most people can get pretty cheap editing software. If you can put together a 5-minute sample work of your footage, that will go a long, long way. And that's just super, super important when you're looking at hundreds and hundreds of applications.
From my perspective, in terms of Kickstarter, I see lots of success for film. I think part of that is that sort of Kickstarter is built on the assumption that traditional funding models are largely broken or don't really work in a lot of cases. And, you know, we don't have as many rich uncles as we used to, and there's only so much blood that we can sell. So there have to be other ways to do things. And so Kickstarter is basically a way for people to appeal directly to their audiences and let them fund the film in exchange for goods, services, experiences. And basically, the filmmaker, producer, whoever, gets to determine the commodities. They get to determine what the economy is, what the funding goal is, how much everything should cost, how everything will run. And what it lets happen is that when you're looking at a film, you're not thinking about it in terms of ROI or its sequel potentials or whatever, any of those things that none of us actually care about. Instead, it's about empathy for the filmmaker or caring about the subject, or even just they're offering something cool or weird for $5 that I'm interested in.
Could you give some examples of the goods and services? Because I didn't know as much
Sure.
about it.
I mean, it's everything from, I mean, it could be sort of whimsical. There was one really nice sort of personal film this guy was doing, and it was like for $75, he would send you the typewriter he wrote the script on, which was like this old typewriter, just this kind of neat memento. There have been several films that have sold roles in films, in particular horror films like to do that for victims. So $2,000 to get yourself dismembered on screen. People buy those. There's also, there's the basic stuff, digital download of the movie for $10, the DVD for $20, but one of my favorites was for $4, a guy would make a director's commentary for any movie that you wanted and just mail you an MP3. And that's something that for him costs him nothing materially, and it's just a way to get people involved and a way to make people care. And so people can be as creative as they want. And generally, we see the more creative projects are, the better that they'll do. And the beauty is that all of these things get to be decided by the person running the project. So nothing is being forced on you. You figure out how you want to structure things completely on your own, and it works. Films. The most a film has raised on Kickstarter so far is about $45,000. That was a documentary on Afghanistan today. But the average film, probably raises 10, 15, 20 grand, to pay for part of their costs or doing whatever. And it's just about presenting your idea honestly and being yourself and being willing to spread the word. But the beauty is you're funding your film at the same time as you're sort of telling people about it, so you're winning all the way down the line.
And I just have a couple of other questions about your model. Was it a conscious decision to make it goods and services versus some small back-end equity participation? I mean, obviously, the math and the paperwork would be
And
probably
the SEC.
Administratively burdensome.
Yeah.
Is that the only reason, or were the
Well,
other
it's
reasons?
also illegal. So there's that. But still, from our perspective, in terms of equity, if you're looking at something and you're thinking like, am I going to get a royalty check for 34 cents from this 2 years from now? Like, you're thinking with that same part of the brain. You're being the dude in the boardroom. Whereas if you're looking at something and you're just thinking, I want this, or I care about this, and I don't really care what I get out of it aside from whatever token that I happen to get, then that's where you get, more of a behavior that's in between consumerism and patronage, and that's sort of a nice, warm, fuzzy area that we can all be happy with.
And what's the forum or marketplace where you're presenting these operations? Is it a website, or
Yeah, I mean,
what's the
Kickstarter.
interface
Yeah,
between
Kickstarter is just if I do say so, a really pretty website where there's a big video piece for you, you talking about whatever you want to do or whatever. It's not just film; it's all sort of creative projects, a lot of art, a lot of music, and most of the action on Kickstarter happens offsite. It happens with people. Basically, we all have these Facebook friends and Twitter followers that are materially worthless. We don't really know what we're supposed to do with them, but it's a really great way to get people to give you money, because just these are the people who love you and who care about you and who you can talk to them about what it is that you're doing. And so most projects we see, the vast majority of their traffic comes from Facebook and Twitter and email and places like that. So it's really a way to capture sort of your entire online presence and just sort of focus it on something actionable.
So it's essentially a more formalized version of what the guy over there with the $10,000 short film was doing on his own.
Absolutely. And also, he doesn't have to worry about credit cards or any of that stuff. It's all handled by us.
Right. Okay. Something that has come up a little bit in our conversations thus far is, financing comes in different shapes and sizes. There are grants, which are not compatible with equity. There is, gap financing needs to come out before equity financing. And, sometimes you might have a foreign sales agent that offers you an MG, which might not be compatible with your gap financing or super gap financing. So this raises the question of, which financing should you accept first? How can you make all of the moving parts synchronize to make a cohesive whole? And, I think this is a question that a lot of newer filmmakers and producers don't give thorough enough consideration, and because, they're just really fired up about getting any form of financing, and, financing is not financing. Some of it's quite expensive and maybe more expensive than you'd want to contemplate, or maybe it's not compatible with your other financing. So I don't know if everyone up here can necessarily address this, but those of you who can, I think it's important to think about, and maybe we can talk about this in the Q&A section as well. But, for instance, you might get an MG from your foreign sales agent who's interested, but, it's important to consider if you're getting an MG, they're going to charge a much higher fee, and that might not be to the liking of your equity financiers, because that means that they're going to be waiting longer to recoup their equity financing. So considerations like that, I think, are important to think about when you're trying to piece together the different financing sources that, what Jason cited earlier, a single source of financing for your entire production budget. That's super rare these days. So, it's probably more often the case that you're going to have at least 3, if not 4, sources of financing. And I think it's important to consider this as you're piecing together your finance plan.
What's an MG?
A minimum guarantee.
Thank you.
So it's like an advance on your sale to that territory. So let's say France gives you a certain MG, or even a foreign sales agent would give you a minimum guarantee on covering the whole world, and so it would be a certain amount sort of guaranteed at the beginning. Now, if you were financing a movie based on this, in all likelihood, you would have to take basically that letter from the foreign sales agent, and then you would have to take it to a bank, and you'd have to you'd have to monetize it, is the fancy term, turn it into money. And, and then that, as Sarah said, is expensive. I mean, there is obviously, interest on that, and you have to put it all into consideration. With all that in mind, there is so many different forces at work, and, people are offering you money, and it's scary to say, do I accept this? Is this going to make things difficult later on? I mean, I hate to say it, but this is like one area where having a relationship with an entertainment lawyer is probably like a really good idea. Obviously there's that whole chicken and egg thing. How in the world can I afford a lawyer, before I get financing for the film? I mean, there's actually there are attorneys out there. They have younger associates, that they want to sign clients, and just like anyone else, you're going to sell them on your film, and you can find an associate who's just very passionate about, Burma, and like they're going to be excited about the idea of working on this project and would do it, pro bono for an opportunity for an investment part later, and certainly just for conversational purposes, to talk to them and run things by them in a general sense would be a good idea. I don't know that much about volunteer lawyers for the arts, but when I first started out, I remember they did a contract or 2 for me. I haven't dealt with them recently, but they do exist. Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts, I believe, is the name of the organization, and that's a great place to start asking these kinds of questions.
One thing that came up, Adella mentioned it, is particularly in documentaries, and also, but more so on the fiction side, is the mixing of funds. So most foundation grant money coming in is due to the actual subject of your film. It's either an artist grant because you're an emerging artist and they're wanting to support your work, or it's an issue-related grant. If that's going through a 501c3, 501c3 nonprofit organizations are, by definition, educational, scientific, artistic, philanthropic, and part of that mandate is to support, particularly in the arts area, support work that is non-commercial, that can't be produced in a for-profit manner. So that's where, particularly on the nonprofit side, they have to be vigilant as to what kind of funding is coming in for any particular project. So how do you get around this? Frequently you don't on smaller films or on documentaries. You try to stay as much as possible in the non-commercial venue, meaning all your funding is coming from your own money and things that people give you, goods and services, in-kind support, money, the most desirable, and grants. Many productions can't go start to finish that way, so you have to get creative. On larger budgeted films, frequently it's you can start off in the non-commercial manner and you apportion, say, a particular part of your production. You're going to go the non-commercial, and that could be just your development phase. You're writing your script, and no one is investing in you yet, and you have no cast, but you could possibly get some support that way through a nonprofit. One of the more famous cases, and this didn't come through IFP, this is through New York Foundation for the Arts, but Kim Pierce in the early days of Boys Don't Cry, again, very difficult subject, and no real stars at that time, did just that. Through NYFA, raised money for the development phase and to eventually shoot a portion of the film that they used to raise bigger financing. So they only did that for part of it.
And is that kind of considered like a little bit of a loophole, to think that you're getting grant funding at the development phase, and then you could go and, for instance, work with because Boys Don't Cry was partially financed by IFC.
Mm-hmm. Well, that came in.
Publicly traded company.
Right. Well, that came in after, but I think it was. In the NYFA case, it was strictly defined. You're going to do this to make a trailer. You're going to work on your script, and you're going to do a trailer, and that's how. And then they shopped that around. Is when IFC came in. A more recent example through IFP, and this is a guy named Roger Ross Williams is making a film. Is actually nominated for a short documentary Oscar this year. It's called Music by Prudence. But when he came to us, he was making a film about this musical group in Africa and had already shot a small trailer, done a little bit of shooting, but needed money to go back to Africa and shoot this longer story and develop it. So came in through us and raised some money to go back to Africa. Well, through, actually it was a project that was also at our Independent Film Week, and through there made a connection to HBO, and then HBO decided to come in, and however, Sheila Nevins wanted to make it a short, not a feature. Thought it would work better as a short, so it turned out to be a short. Filmmaker's kind of relieved now that he's not actually making a full feature. But that's what happened too. So we were, all good intentions. We were totally supporting a very mission-driven project that was a documentary, which then later came in with more for-profit type financing. So then we just you went as far as you could, and
so you had to step back.
And then we step back.
So a license fee from a broadcaster qualifies as a commercial investment?
No. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. But because they came in and totally finished it, they no longer needed to do that money.
But theoretically, you could take some grant funding from Cinereach or
definitely
fiscal sponsorship, and
or
you can
even
take a license fee as long as it's not equity.
Yes,
a license fee is compatible.
Right, because you're still functioning with a lot of these pre-sales with either international sales. I'm talking about documentaries now. There's still no guarantee that you're ever going to make your full budget or even make a profit. So it's all about how you're structuring. You're not positioning your project as an investment opportunity. It's more you're doing it because you're doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
And just so everyone understands, the difference between an MG or an advance, those are monies that you would get from a distribution company that's going to handle all media, versus a license fee. A license fee is a fixed, non-recoupable sum of money that a broadcaster is going to pay you for a specific window of time, and in the past it used to be a specific number of airings. Usually it's unlimited now. But that's something. HBO is extremely active in the docs world, and they could pay a license fee that could apparently exist side by side with the doc. But there's a big difference between a license fee from a broadcaster and a minimum guarantee or an advance.
Well, I wanted to bring up budgets. Cinereach is interested in funding independent filmmakers. the reality of the funding landscape today is such that in one way it's easier to make a film. Access to digital technology, I think, has democratized the idea of making your own film. But because of the economy, people are scared to invest. So it is possible to raise a couple $100,000 through grants and crowdsourcing and other creative ways of raising money and make a feature-length film. When we see documentaries that are asking for budgets of $1 million, there's no way that that kind of money is going to be raised through grants. So just to be realistic about the marketplace, and a lot of the filmmakers, especially in the documentary film world, they shoot a lot of it themselves, or they get in-kind services. It's really important to sort of keep in mind that funding a film with hundreds of thousands of dollars through grants is really, really difficult today. And what else did I want to say? For fiction films, what Milton was just talking about, we've given grants for research and development when it seems likely that equity will be raised. If you have a $2 million budget fiction film and you want research and development money and you have no other investors on board, it's unlikely that we'll give you that grant because it's too risky for us. And we have had projects where we've given them a development grant and they weren't able to raise even a few $100,000. So that's money that we use to support the filmmaker, and then the project never happened. And it's scary. So just to keep in mind that it's possible to make a fiction film for $400,000, $500,000. And we've funded films that have had that kind of budget.
Yeah, I agree with getting as much done on your own. I mean, certainly if you're going to people and asking for money to make a film and the first thing you do is buy a camera and learn how to edit, and that's what the money's going to pay for, it's going to be tough. But for Kickstarter, obviously we have a very different way of sort of thinking about funding. And, for us, the average pledge amount is $25. So it's they're small amounts. And from our perspective, it's, we all want to hunt the big whale that will just magically write us the check. But, in reality, it's more valuable now to have 10,000 people give you $1 than just one man hand you a suitcase of $10,000 in it, because those dollars, every one of those peoples now has an investment, an emotional investment attachment. They're basically paying to tell your story, to be a part of it, to market what it is that you want to do. And especially now with so much of the world existing in social media and all those things that we define as that, that's really, really important to have a lot of voices that are your advocates, that are on your side. And one thing I wanted to mention about Kickstarter that I didn't mention before, which is that all funding on Kickstarter is all or nothing. So you set a funding amount and you have a deadline, a time frame to reach that amount. It's anywhere from 1 to 90 days. If when the deadline is up, you have reached or surpassed your goal, all the credit cards are charged at once, you get your money, you do your thing. If you're even $1 short, all pledges are canceled and everyone just walks away. So it's brutal, except that once projects reach 25% funding, they have a 90% success rate. And that has been true all along. And the reason is that once people show that they believe in something and you've built sort of that base audience, they're willing to tell your story for you. And when it comes down to those last 3 or 4 days when you have to make this insurmountable gap, these people just come alive for you. There was an example just a few weeks ago, this documentary about this mixed martial arts fighter named Jens Pulver. I'd never heard of him before. But this director, Gregory Bain, he's from Idaho.
Oh my God, I know Greg Bain.
Yeah. So Greg Bain, he shot this trailer, spent 2 days with the guy, shot a little 2-minute trailer that was beautiful, and put it up and said he wanted to raise $25,000 in 20 days to make the movie. And he got off the gate, really strong. But with about 4 days left, and this was MLK weekend, so holiday weekend no less. 4 days left, he needed $13,000, so he'd raised 12. And I thought there was no way he was gonna make it. And by Sunday he made it. He ended up raising close to $30,000. And there wasn't a single pledge larger than $100. And what he was doing was he was just hustling. He was talking to people on message boards, people who are interested in him. He was doing radio interviews. He basically treated this as a full-time job and just his chance to tell this vision of this film he wanted to make. And for him, it worked. And now he has these 500-600 people who gave him money, who now passionately care about this film, even if they have no idea who the guy is, or they love the fighter, but they've never seen a documentary before. In either case, this is something that they, feel a part of now. And so something like that, and, not everyone works out. Film projects have a success rate of about 50%. So some work, some don't. But, when it does, it's about these connections that people are able to make. And it's really exciting to watch and to be a part of.
Just because what you're doing is new and interesting, and I think it's definitely a sign of where things are going, an interesting places to go in independent film. I just want to make sure I'm clear on the nuts and bolts of what you're doing because it's so new. So do you have a minimum percentage of the overall budget that you guys are?
No,
it could be 5% of the budget?
It's whatever they want. I mean, if, basically we, with every person, with every filmmaker, producer, we just assume that they know better than us, what they need and what constitutes success. So some people might undershoot what they actually need by huge amounts. We'd have instances where someone has said, my goal is 20, but I have this producer who says, if I can prove that I have enough audience to raise 20 grand in a month, then they're going to kick in and match it. We see stuff like that, which sort of makes sense.
Right. So I'm curious then, because you're leaving so many other variables open, what's the rationale behind the all or nothing?
Basically. There's a couple of reasons. One is that it's protection for everyone. So if you need 50 grand to do something, you only raise 20 grand, but yet you're still expected to fulfill those things. Obviously that's a lot of people are going to be disappointed. But also there's sort of a gaming element where you're just sort of following along, and it's like, will he make it? Will he not? And it really incentivizes more people to act and jump on board because everyone just feels like if I don't do my part, that's it. And for all of us, where we're inundated with so many things and there's just fatigue of stuff like that, having that ticking clock, having that hard deadline is really important. And I know for the people who are running the projects, routinely, I talk to almost everyone who starts a project, and routinely everyone is terrified of the deadline. And I run projects myself, and it's terrifying. But in the end, I think they're really happy to at least have like an end date on that stress in their life. If you're out there trying to fund a film, as probably everyone here knows much better than I do, it's this thing that's just sort of hanging over you. But at least here there's a finite period and a finite goal that you're going for. And you can raise more. The average successful project raises 20% more than its goal. So, once people are in, they really start to come in.
And how do you guys commission the funds raised? Or is it just sort of like a credit card fee almost? Or?
Yeah, well, in terms of what we take, Kickstarter takes 5% if something was successfully funded. Mm-hmm. So 5% of what was raised, we charge. In terms of the mechanics of it, when you pledge to a project or back a project, you just check out on Amazon, like you're buying a book. And then at the end of the project, either your credit card is charged or not, based on whether it's successful or not. And then the funds just get withdrawn to the person's personal bank account, and they go do whatever.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Can you go through a second round of funding?
Yeah, we've had, there's a doc on Andrei Tarkovsky that's gone through like 4 rounds right now. And there it did the first was like initial post-editing, second was like marketing, another one was like color, all this sort of stuff. So the interesting thing is that even though as film viewers, there's no reason for us to know about the business, really. Who gives a shit what stuff makes it a box office? What does it matter? But we also sort of understand the mechanics of film a lot better than we used to where someone can say, I'm trying to raise money for post and for this. And I think a majority of people understand what that is now, which is sort of nice. So the phase thing is a lot easier in that respect.
What I really like about this model is what I was saying before about post money being really hard to get and really expensive money, and that is so counterintuitive, right? It's like, well, no, you have the movie in front of you and you can look at it, and now you can really sort of judge it a lot better. But with this model, it actually puts it back into people's hands, and and I'm sure it's a lot easier for them to raise money in post because they can actually watch the movie. Yeah, it's great.
And for just again getting into the nuts and bolts of your model, is it considered a donation? If for legal purposes, you were saying it's and are there other types of finance? It can coexist with equity and any other type of financing, right?
Right. Legally, I have no idea.
Right.
But all the money is spent in exchange for something of value. So if I choose to back you for $7, I'm getting something for my $7. So it is transactional. People can choose to not get anything in exchange, but we really stress the transaction because if it's about donation, there's a fatigue to that, and sort of the relationship to it changes, and it becomes about guilt and all these other things rather than excitement. And so, yeah, we really stress that people, and the value is exchanged on both sides. You know, if someone's passion should benefit, you know, other people just as much as them, like that's a great passion to have, you know.
Because Jason is the most sort of traditional sort of narrative film producer up here on this panel, and actually Jason and I have worked together a few times. I know he's produced films, you know, from really art house film like Goodbye Solo to Dare, which is, you know, more
available on Netflix and in DVD stores everywhere.
which is
See it.
you know, it's a genre film that has cast, and you know, both films, you know, went on the festival circuit and were both high quality, but you know, very, very different. I would be curious to hear Jason speak to, you know, how between Goodbye Solo, which is an art house film, versus Dare, which was a more genre-oriented film, you know, if you would take different tacks, or is in your book an independent film, and you would be knocking on the same doors in terms of financing.
All right. Well, with Goodbye Solo, I was working with a well-known director, Ramin Barani, who had made a film, Man Pushed Cart, and he had made a Chop Shop. And so he was someone who was very well respected, and his films had been released domestically, internationally, on DVD. We financed about half of that movie with ITVS. Are you guys familiar with ITVS? Certainly, if anybody here is a documentary filmmaker, you should definitely go to itvs.org and look at all the sort of funding that they do. They do, in the United States, it's like one of the very few places with major funding for docs. You know, we did it, normally you would be going through these open calls, and we had a relationship with ITVS, and, you know, so we kind of went in through back channels, and we got the film funded. And then after that, it was private equity. And I think a lot of that was something that, you know, unless you know, if you're working on a film, if you're a first-time director, or if you're a producer working with a director who's a first-timer, I mean, it's not gonna be the same road.
I'm sorry, Jason. Typically, ITVS comes in for last money on docs. Was it the same way with Goodbye Solo? Last money in.
Last money. No, they were like the first money, but I mean, it was like, you know, it was a relatively small amount of money. And, you know, I mean, there's, it's, yeah, and so that was sort of this weird mixture of what Sarah was talking about. It was a license fee / like equity position. It was very weird, and it was very, because ITVS is like governmental, you know, they sort of have these deals that, you know, have existed for a long time, from a long time ago, and so they work very uneasily with the contemporary models of financing, especially just private equity. You know, so they have this weird thing where they, you know, they come in with this license fee, and it's like 1099 income, but they also take an equity position in the back end. And whereas, you know, there's a pretty traditional model of funding, at least for fiction films, you know, where an investor comes in and they get like 115 or 120% of all the money that comes in, and then after that you would pay off. You basically split it 50-50, the investors and the managers. And there might be like a deferred pool in between there. And the ITVS money was really weird because they just like wanted a flat percentage from day one, you know, and you had to do all sorts of complicated things to figure it out. Yes? Were you raising your hand?
Oh, no, I was doing the 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. 5 minutes to Q&A? All right, well, maybe I should let that go. But anyway, keep going. So that was sort of on the one hand, and the other was Dare. And Dare was a pretty traditional model, I would say, for a fiction film, which is the writer and the director of the film were both first timers, so they didn't really have that, you know, other than a short film. It was based on a short film that was very popular, but they went after their friends and family, and we did very traditional sort of, you know, we had like a dinner party at, you know, one of these people's houses, you know, and they invited all the friends and family over, and we made a presentation, and it was a very old-fashioned sort of thing, and it worked. Is Katie Mustard here? she was going to be here, but she had done something that I was very impressed by a couple of weeks back, and did something similar at like an attorney's office, and got like great food and great like liquor sponsors, like the kind of party that a sexy sort of entertainment party, and had the stars of the movie come, and it was just extremely impressive for the investors. And I think that. So in terms of in terms of selling an experience, I think taking investors to kind of a cool, fun party, and then saying, you're going to be part of this fun, interesting, different investment, and then you're going to be going to cool parties like this at Sundance, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I've seen it worked really well with Dare. We raised all our funding that way. And, I think, and that was a commercial film that's on Netflix and it's on DVD.
The funding, you said you raised all the funding, I'm sorry, but how much was that? Like $200,000, $500,000?
Oh, well, it was, we like to say under $2 million. I mean, it's sort of like saying, on an independent film, asking the budget's like, asking someone's age. It was like, it was between $1 million and $2 million.
Yeah, I was going to add, I think what Jason's talking about in terms of, selling the experience of, the sexiness and allure of being involved in independent film to prospective investors is a much more realistic approach when your budget's $2 million and under. There was a guy over there who said his budget's $12.5 million. In a scenario like that, you have to sell your investors on the fact that it's a sound investment, and unless they are looking for a tax write-off, they're going to want to make their money back, and hopefully with a premium. So, I think that in the under $2 million range, you can cobble together money from people who are doing it almost as sport, for a lack of a better word. But once you're looking for funds, to support a budget of more than $5 million, I think you have to undertake a totally different strategy that's about a sound business plan and, showing numbers that are going to look like at least, most of your money could be recouped, if not deliver you a, return on your investment. So, you're going to Q&A now? All right.
I actually have a feature film that I've budgeted at just under $2 million.
Sorry, there's a mic.
Oh. So I have a feature film that I've budgeted at just under $2 million, which deals with a lot of topical things that might normally go through non-for-profits. It's a version of a portion of the Epic of Gilgamesh. So it's taking place in southern Iraq. It's going to be featuring an all-ethnic cast. It's definitely got potential for fiscal sponsorship, but the thing is that at a higher budget bracket like that, it's going to be a little challenging to raise that money through grants. And you talked about the difficulty of finding a way to balance equity and grant money. Would it be prudent to seek grant money only up until development is over and it's clear that the project is getting off the ground? Or what's a good method to go through something like this that clearly has a very topical interest that would, if it was a documentary or something like that, find 501c3 status?
Milton,
when you say it has an ethnic cast, does it have any cast that's recognizable internationally, or no?
Well, I've got some internationally recognized Middle Eastern folk musicians working on the score, and we haven't actually cast it yet, but it's going to be an all-Iraqi cast. So I'm just wondering if it's a good idea to approach it from that angle at all, or if I should go, like you said, purely with throwing parties and hoping that the right people come, the right people are interested.
Do you have you done a feature before?
I haven't done a feature before. This is going to be my first feature. We've spent about $7,000 developing it so far, and we have a lot of concept art and props and visual things that we've fabricated and put up on a Facebook group. We've been trying to start a Kickstarter project, but you need an invitation to get onto the site. So maybe I can get one tonight. But
I mean, it's the only idea I could think of. I mean, I don't know that much about what the U.S. government is doing in Iraq, but I know that they are, from what I gather, spending billions of dollars over there, and maybe you could turn this into some kind of jobs thing over there. Mm-hmm. I am serious as a heart attack.
It's true. It's potentially true.
Is there any way that you could bring your...
You'll have to cut your hair, though.
Is there any way you could bring that budget down? I mean, $2 million for, in all due respect, $2 million for a first-time filmmaker working in, and presumably it's not in the English language. So commercially, that's a tough sell. So you're in this sort of tough break point in terms of, I'm sure it's a challenging shoot, which is what's, bringing up, because you're obviously not spending a lot of money above the line, so it's probably
Right.
a lot of below the line, where your budget is largely falling, but is there any way to bring that down? Then you might be able to live in the world.
Bringing it down is like what we're trying most often to do, like finding ways to make this a less and less expensive film.
Does that include post-production?
I mean,
Could you maybe get to post on grants or something?
I'm gonna graduate from the School of Visual Arts shortly, and they are usually very generous to alumni with use of their post-production facilities. So I'm hoping to take a lot of money down on post and be crewing a lot of people who are just graduating, looking for jobs, and are willing to defer their payment in part or in whole. Because I have a lot of people at the school who are invested in it and who do feel like it's their project as much as mine. So we're looking for ways to take the cost down like that, so that there's possibilities of like doing it with grant money and things like that. But when you're making an epic, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's difficult to bring the cost down. So I'm in a funny kind of middle place.
I mean, have you looked to Europe at all? Because sometimes it can be, if it's really this special, one-of-a-kind art house film, you can find these, sort of,
Yeah, there's things
like...
like...
the co-production office, for instance, they love these sort of impossible but ambitious art films that will, maybe someday, maybe in a year and a half be premiering at the Berlin Film Festival. I don't know, that's a very labor-intensive road to take, and, it's a gamble, but you could reach more success, arguably, by, knocking on those doors than in America, and if it has, an auteur sensibility, which I'm gathering it does, they're often responsive to that.
I think that's actually an incredibly good idea, although the only thing I would add there is I wouldn't do the knocking on the doors for him. I would have him get a producer, a European producer who's shown an interest in this area, Middle Eastern, whatever. That person who's put together other co-productions before.
That's one of the things we're looking for is I'm taking as many producing classes through the school and speaking to producers as I possibly can, but finding another producer for an independent filmmaker who's been in the business longer has been one of my priorities for a while. What's a good way to connect with producers like that who are already in the industry?
Look at films that you think have a similar sensibility. I mean, I would not say like, oh, go find producers who have made films set in or about Iraq. I would look for the more sort of macro connection. If you obviously understand the sensibility of your filmmaking and the type of story that you're going to look to tell. What are the films that you admire, that you might be emulating their sensibility or inspired by their sensibility? Look, go to IMDb, look at the credits, see who sold the film, see who produced the film, and I think instead of looking for someone who has a success rate and just say like, oh, you look like you know what you're doing, you're going to have a much more inspired connection or outreach if you say, I know what you've been doing, I respect it, I get it, I think you would get what I'm up to.
Sounds good.
Scott with the glasses.
Hi. What would you say the U.S. and foreign film markets right now are like for independent animated feature films?
You obviously have some success stories for, director-driven films that are really incredibly well executed, like Persepolis, The Triplets of Belleville, Waltz with Bashir, so there are films like that that are, definitively art house films that are aimed at adults, really. And then, outside of that, I think indie animated films are tough. We see them from time to time. There's this film that's nominated.
The Secret of Kells.
Yeah, Secret of Kells, and they don't really have formal distribution. That's nominated for Best Animated Film, alongside Up. And this is a film that doesn't really have proper distribution, and I think that kind of gives you an idea of how tough it is. There's not really much going on in between a film like Triplets of Belleville and Up or Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. It's like there's this gaping in between space. Richard Linklater did Waking Life, and that I think was a mixed bag, and that was 7 years ago. Trying to do what's the sci-fi film that he did?
Yeah.
Scanner Darkly. So the success rate of films in that sort of indie adult space, but a little alternative, is tough. And it's often the case that independent or animated films are generally targeting families, and that's a very expensive audience to reach. There's not really much of an option outside of doing a wide release, and really only studios are equipped to do that. But I think, what's going on, unfortunately, with the Book of Kells shows how formulaic and rigid the mindset is in terms of distribution of independent animated films. So I think it's tough.
Oh, sorry, not even European distribution for Secret of the Kells right now?
I can't really speak to that, but I suspect they have better. I believe it's an Irish film. I'm sure that they have distribution in Ireland and the UK, but maybe Western Europe. I suspect you could probably find out on the internet, but just in the States, it's rough.
Thank you.
In the back, the guy.
Milton, how do you like to best be contacted? Can we contact you via email or?
Yeah, email. Email is probably best, or you can call. I'll give you my card afterwards.
Who has the mic? I don't want to make the person with the mic. Who has the mic right now? I don't want to make the person. The woman in the black shirt, against the wall.
My question is for Yancey. I'm wondering if you've ever worked with films that have fiscal sponsors, because they take 6 to 7% already.
Yeah, it's for us. It's kind of irrelevant whether or not you have one. It's fine. It's fine if you do, and certainly a lot of films have that's been the case with them.
But I guess you don't have a special deal then for someone who has a fiscal sponsor,
No,
because
no special.
Generally that's like a certain type of topic that's not expected to make so much return.
No, there's no special deal. Our bandwidth costs the same, whether it's.
This woman in the white over here.
I was just wondering about those invitations to Kickstarter as well. Could you talk about how that happens?
Sure. So it's actually not that hard to get a project on Kickstarter. We're just cryptic about it. But now if you just go to kickstarter.com/start, there's basically a form field where you can we ask who you are, what is it you want to do, how you would reward your supporters, and how you would plan on getting your project funded. All those are handled by me and one other person. We just go through and we email a lot with everyone. And basically what we are screening for is just we're solely for creative projects, so we don't allow charities typically, or personal charity. My dog has cancer, whatever.
What's a good method to go through something like this that clearly has a very topical interest that would, if it was a documentary or something like that, find 501c3 status?
Milton,
When you say it has an ethnic cast, does it have any cast that's recognizable internationally, or no?
Well, I've got some internationally recognized Middle Eastern folk musicians working on the score, and we haven't actually cast it yet, but it's going to be an all-Iraqi cast. I'm just wondering if it's a good idea to approach it from that angle at all, or if I should go, like you said, purely with throwing parties and hoping that the right people come, the right people are interested.
Do you have have you done a feature before?
I haven't done a feature before. This is going to be my first feature. We've spent about $7,000 developing it so far, and we have a lot of concept art and props and visual things that we've fabricated and put up on a Facebook group. We've been trying to start a Kickstarter project, but you need an invitation to get onto the site. So maybe I can get one tonight. But
I mean, the only idea I could think of. I mean, I don't know that much about what the U.S. government is doing in Iraq, but I know that they are, from what I gather, spending billions of dollars over there, and maybe you could turn this into some kind of jobs thing over there.
Mm-hmm.
I am serious as a heart attack.
It's true. It's potentially true.
Is there any way that you could bring your...
You'll have to cut your hair, though.
Is there any way you could bring that budget down? I mean, $2 million for, in all due respect, $2 million for a first-time filmmaker working in, and presumably it's not in the English language. So commercially, that's a tough sell. So you're in this sort of tough break point in terms of, I'm sure it's a challenging shoot, which is what's, bringing up, because you're obviously not spending a lot of money above the line, so it's probably
Right.
a lot of below the line, where your budget is largely falling, but is there any way to bring that down? Then you might be able to live in the world.
Bringing it down is like what we're trying most often to do, like finding ways to make this a less and less expensive film.
Does that include post-production?
I mean,
Could you maybe get to post on grants or something?
I'm gonna graduate from the School of Visual Arts shortly, and they are usually very generous to alumni with use of their post-production facilities. So I'm hoping to take a lot of money down on post and be crewing a lot of people who are just graduating, looking for jobs, and are willing to defer their payment in part or in whole. Because I have a lot of people at the school who are invested in it and who do feel like it's their project as much as mine. We're looking for ways to take the cost down like that, so that there's possibilities of like doing it with grant money and things like that. But when you're making an epic, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's difficult to bring the cost down. So I'm in a funny kind of middle place.
I mean, have you looked to Europe at all? Because sometimes it can be, if it's really the special, one-of-a-kind art house film, you can find these, sort of,
Yeah, there's things
like...
like
the co-production office, for instance, they love these sort of impossible but ambitious art films that will, maybe someday, maybe in a year and a half be premiering at the Berlin Film Festival. I don't know, that's a very labor-intensive road to take, and, it's a gamble, but you could reach more success, arguably, by, knocking on those doors than in America, and if it has, an auteur sensibility, which I'm gathering it does, they're often responsive to that.
I think that's actually an incredibly good idea. Although the only thing I would add there is I wouldn't do the knocking on the doors for him. I would have him get a producer, a European producer who's shown an interest in this area, Middle Eastern, whatever. That person who's put together other co-productions before.
That's one of the things we're looking for is I'm taking as many producing classes through the school and speaking to producers as I possibly can, but finding another producer for an independent filmmaker who's been in the business longer has been one of my priorities for a while. What's a good way to connect with producers like that who are already in the industry?
Look at films that you think have a similar sensibility. I mean, I would not say like, oh, go find producers who have made films set or set in or about Iraq. I would look for the more sort of macro connection. You know, if you obviously understand the sensibility of your filmmaking and the type of story you're going to look to tell. What are the films that you admire, that you might be emulating their sensibility or inspired by their sensibility? Look, you know, go to IMDb, look at the credits, see who sold the film, see who produced the film, and you know, I think instead of looking for someone who has a success rate and just say like, oh, you know, you look like you know what you're doing, you know, you're going to have a much more inspired connection or outreach if you say, I know what you've been doing, I respect it, I get it, I think you would get what I'm up to.
Sounds good.
Scott with the glasses.
Hi, what would you say the U.S. and foreign film markets right now are like for independent animated feature films?
You know, you obviously have some success stories for, you know, director-driven films that are really incredibly well executed, like Persepolis, The Triplets of Belleville, Waltz with Bashir, you know, so there are films like that that are, you know, definitively art house films that are aimed at adults, really. And then, you know, outside of that, I think indie animated films are tough. You know, we see them from time to time. You know, there's this film that's nominated.
The Secret of Kells.
Yeah, Secret of Kells, and they don't really have formal distribution. That's nominated for Best Animated Film, you know, alongside Up. And this is a film that doesn't really have proper distribution, and I think that kind of gives you an idea of how tough it is. You know, there's not really much going on in between a film like Triplets of Belleville and Up or Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. You know, it's like there's this gaping in between space. You know, Richard Linklater did Waking Life, and you know that I think was a mixed bag, and you know that was 7 years ago. You know, trying to do what's the sci-fi film that he did?
Yeah.
Scanner Darkly. You know, so the success rate of films in that sort of indie adult space, but a little alternative, is tough, and you know it's often the case that independent or animated films. You know, generally targeting families, and that's a very expensive audience to reach. You know, there's not really much of an option outside of doing a wide release, and really only studios are equipped to do that. But I think, you know, what's going on, unfortunately, with the Book of Kells shows how formulaic and rigid the mindset is in terms of distribution of independent animated films. So I think it's tough.
Oh, sorry, not even European distribution for Secret of the Kells right now?
I can't really speak to that, but I suspect they have better. You know, I believe it's an Irish film. I'm sure that they have distribution in Ireland and the UK, but maybe Western Europe. I mean, I suspect you could probably find out on the internet, but just in the States, it's rough.
Thank you.
In the back, the guy.
Milton, how do you like to best be contacted? I mean, can we contact you via email or?
Yeah, email. Email is probably best, or you can call. I'll give you my card afterwards.
Who has the mic? I don't want to make the person with the mic. Who has the mic right now? I don't want to make the person. The woman in the black shirt, against the wall.
My question is for Yancey. I'm wondering if you've ever worked with films that have fiscal sponsors, because they take 6 to 7% already.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's kind of irrelevant whether or not you have one. It's fine. It's fine if you do, and certainly a lot of films have that's been the case with them.
But I guess you don't have a special deal then for someone who has a fiscal sponsor,
No,
because
no
I mean,
special.
generally that's like a certain type of topic that's not expected to make so much return.
No, there's no special deal. Our bandwidth costs the same, whether it's.
This woman in the white over here.
I was just wondering about those invitations to Kickstarter as well. Could you talk about how that happens?
Sure. So it's actually not that hard to get a project on Kickstarter. We're just cryptic about it. But now if you just go to kickstarter.com/start, there's basically a form field where you can we ask who you are, what is it you want to do, how you would reward your supporters, and how you would plan on getting your project funded. All those are handled by me and one other person. We just go through and we email a lot with everyone. And basically what we are screening for is just, we're solely for creative projects. So we don't allow charities typically, or personal charity, my dog has cancer, whatever. And instead it's about people doing creative projects. We're making sure that's the case. And then, we're just sort of looking for people who are passionate and who have an idea of what it is that they want to do. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you just go to Kickstarter/start.
The guy in glasses here.
Which glasses? My glasses? Okay, quick question. I mean, you mentioned for writer-directors perhaps approaching producers of films they admired, but that begs the question, how do you approach those people? Because, that's clearly not always an easy thing. And I think connected to that is my question for Jason. He made Dare with these newbie film directors, and how did that happen?
Well, that was, they had a producer on the film who was unable to sort of give a kind of a day-to-day commitment to the film over the, when you're a producer of a film, it might be a 3-year commitment, pretty much, from the time that you raise that funding through the time that, you're done with the very last of it. And, the last, you've given everything to everyone who's bought the film, and, it's gone through distribution, and I mean, it's even longer than that. And so, she said, let's team up, and it'll be a lot easier on the both of us. And so that's how I became involved. It worked out incredibly well. I mean, I really like first-time filmmakers. There's a lot of energy involved, and there's a lot of, in the cases of the films that I've worked on, I mean, it really means something. It's very exciting, On the same token, you can imagine how it can be a real pain in the butt too, because everything means so much, and it's, they don't know which fights are not worth fighting for, and et cetera. And so, but I've done it so many times with first-time filmmakers that I know how to navigate those waters usually. I mean, as far as approaching producers or directors or anyone like that, we get a lot of, I'm sure many of you do too, you get a lot of emails from people that are interested in contacting you. And the one thing I can say is just that for the first contact, you want to make it incredibly short, and you want to make it personal. You want to there's a reason why you're contacting, somebody. I'll get things that are very much like a boilerplate, like someone's just like thrown my name in the same letter that they've sent to everybody. And it's like, it's like insulting, and it's also a waste of time, and I'm certainly not going to respond to it. But if somebody tells me, either how much they love one of my movies, and not just I really loved it, like also prove why, and or it gives me an incredibly interesting story about them. I was a war journalist for many years, and I just couldn't take it anymore, and so I've stopped, and now I've written a screenplay about my experiences. Do you I saw your movie, I thought it was great, blah blah blah. Would you be interested in me sending you the script? Like 2-3 lines, that kind of thing. As far as like sleuthing out their email addresses and stuff like that, I mean, you can do it if you need to.
That guy.
The other guy with glasses.
Yeah, exactly.
I have 2 questions. First is about Section 181 film incentives, which have cleared the House and are most likely to pass the Senate. If some of you could speak to using that as part of your investment structure with investors. And the second is about Kickstarter. I have a Kickstarter invite. I'm starting a project. But I wanted to know more specifically about how this income that you raise is dealt. There was a question about what the legal structure is, and it says on the website there are pledges and rewards, and what I'm concerned about is if I do offer things, some people pre-sell DVDs, there's all kinds of, some are thank yous in the credits, or could be a poster. Are these from the end of the project creator? Am I subject to sales tax for New York State if I'm selling a poster, if that's like a $500 level? Or how do we deal with these kind of questions so we make sure that we're not getting into some difficulties further, down the road?
Yeah, I'll answer that real quick. Basically, the fact that the money comes through Kickstarter is kind of irrelevant. It's about sort of what the money is spent on. So, always talk to your accountant, blah, blah, blah. But the one thing that you cited is sales tax. So that is the one thing that's sort of a hard and fast thing, where if you sell a good to someone who's also in your state, and it's a state that has sales tax, then you're required to report that income. But the other stuff, if there isn't a good being exchanged, then it's just sort of in this hazy area where it's not really clear, at least from my perspective, what it is to do. But sales tax is one that you would want to keep on top of, especially if you're moving a lot of stuff.
But I don't want to keep interrupting, but let's say I know people structure these awards at levels like, $5, $20, $100. So let's say you do get some of those people who are giving you one of your high reward values. Is the sales tax event on the? That's what my producers and I are having difficulty discerning. Is it if the poster's at $500, is that a $500 poster sales tax event, or is that poster worth $5? And
yeah, you're kind of blowing my mind a little bit.
And I talked to an accountant about this, and they didn't know either.
Yeah. We could talk about it after. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but it's a good one to figure out.
And in terms of selling DVDs, and I'm sure you have some opinions about this, but if your film is a contender for, or even could be a contender for conventional distribution channels, I would discourage you from pre-selling DVDs, because that's the last thing that your DVD distributor, your presumptive DVD distributor, wants to hear about. And so I would think twice about that as an option. So,
and as far as Section 181 film incentives, can anyone speak to that?
Is that the Jobs Creation Act?
Yeah, it's been for the past 6 years.
Exactly. I've brought, it seems like this wonderful sort of magic bullet-y kind of thing, but every time I've ever brought it up to investors, it's usually nothing that has any kind of impact. First of all, for example, if we look at Dare, the biggest investor I think was $100,000. These are people, with a lot of money. $100,000 doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to them as it does to you or me. Or at least me, I don't know about you, but like it's also a little complicated. It means that they can sort of write off this money for many, many years if it's passive money. So it means it has to be like real estate investments, and it's just a little too complicated for most people to really care that much about. Their accountant might, but it's not like, it doesn't move the needle, as they say, very, very much. What does mean a lot is soft money, like tax incentives, tax credits from states. That's like very serious money. I've like gotten checks for $300,000 from Pennsylvania or North Carolina. That's a lot.
Did you give that immediately back to your investors, or was that part of your financing scheme?
Hell no, they don't see that. No, I'm kidding. Whatever. That depends. Yeah. There's like a recoupment schedule, and like maybe at that point you're paying it back to like people you've taken loans out to or something along those lines. But certainly for this, I don't want to reveal too much about like investment scenarios, but like in times when I've had a single investor, they've considered it really to be like kind of how much the movie is costing them. They're minusing the tax incentive, and that's anyway with these tax incentives. That's when I've seen investors like take out their virtual calculators and figure out how much they're getting back in a way that doesn't happen with Section 181.
the woman in the red back there.
Hi, this is also a two-parter. First, are there other kind of new funding models like Kickstarter that we should all be keeping our eyes on? And second, can anyone speak to how does international co-production for fiscally sponsored docs work?
I don't know. Maybe you can answer this, Adella. I'm trying to think. I really don't know. I've been anybody who's gotten international co-production money, not not a pre-sale, but someone like the BBC coming in to co-produce it. I don't really know because I haven't dealt directly with it. Do you know?
It's a little bit of a complicated issue for Cinereach because we're a nonprofit, so all international applicants that apply to us have to have a fiscal sponsor that has an office in the U.S. and in their home country in order for that to work, which is very tricky. It's doable, we've done it, but it just, it's not an easy thing to do. So, I don't know, it's...
Well, it kind of gets back to what Sarah asked me earlier. It really depends on your budget and are they coming in at what stage and for how much, because in fiscal sponsorship, people can give you money to make your film that don't have to go through the as long as they're not as long as you're not making a contract with them by which you're giving them a percentage of the profits, it's okay. Most of those co-producing deals on a documentary are usually with broadcasters, although they could be with internationally based production entity. But I think for most, you might be talking just about broadcasters, and that money doesn't come through us, and it goes to you, and it's. I think there's a way to justify it, but it would really depend on the particular case.
The docs that I know of that have had U.S. money and European money are through pre-sales with BBC or Arte or other broadcasters. So co-production is, I think, a lot harder to do.
And other new funding methods besides Kickstarter? Any suggestions?
I would, it really depends film by film. It depends on whether you're working on a documentary and what the subject is. I think part of your job as a filmmaker, or, whether you're a director or producer, is to, stay abreast of what's going on in the industry. Variety, Screen International, Nikki Fink, Hollywood Reporter, IndieWire, they're all online and updated practically on the hour. So if you keep your eyes open, you can stay abreast of what's going on, and it really depends on the film. If you have a skateboarding documentary, you might be able to get soft money from Quicksilver or whatever. If you're an issue doc, you can hit up the grant sources. If it really depends. If you have name actors, you can hit up the foreign sales agents. It depends. The foreign sales world is still pretty competitive. Certain territories are, still pre-buying films actively. It totally depends on your model. So I think it's hard to speak to that too generally. I don't know if you guys.
Yeah, certainly it's a very broad. It's very broad, so we'd have to know exactly the project, and then there might be newer things.
One more question.
How
We
about
got
this lady over
over here.
Thank you. First, I want to thank you. It's just been a very informative presentation. I've learned a lot. I'd like to know if you could speak to underwriting for documentaries, and how does it differ from some of the other funding sources that you've mentioned? And then how do you go about getting it?
How do you mean underwriting? I'm not even sure I understand.
Okay, so for example, one of my professors is making documentaries that will air on PBS, and he said he needs 2 to 3 underwriters, sponsoring organizations, and now he's seeking those underwriters. So the station, the PBS station, often isn't interested in taking on his documentary unless he has underwriters.
Underwriting is a thing that's specific for PBS.
Okay.
And if you go to pbs.org or to itvs.org and go to the producers section, there's like very, very complicated sort of scenarios about underwriting. It's basically advertising with tons and tons of restrictions because it's PBS. But it's basically advertising.
Now, in BBC, would it be the same or similar?
I don't know.
And then, I guess since we're on it, he also is thinking of just selling the documentary to a station for, say, like $3,000.
Well, you want to get a sales agent, unless this guy, there's a whole structure with PBS, whether they want to take on something for any of their strands or whether it's open to affiliates. There are even companies that do that. So you would pitch it to them. But to try to sell it off, I mean, if you're making it in Newark and you want to deal with the Newark station, and there's also a structure of the stations coming in to help produce it through various initiatives, all connected to PBS. But in any structure where the filmmaker wants to sell to television, I think it's best to have a professional get involved with you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and usually if you're only getting a $3,000 license fee, it's typically a regional station, and if you're selling rights regionally, that's going to create clutter and obstacles for doing a national broadcast deal, and that's kind of putting the cart before the horse. You'd want to take a regional deal as sort of a, icing on the cake, kind of small after the fact deal, not a front-loaded deal that would be fettering your options in any way.
I just wanted to say to the lady who just spoke, I might be able to help her with some information through the BBC, so she can see me after.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
I used to work at the BBC, so I might be able to help you with some information.
Oh, thanks. Okay, we'll look for each other.
All right, well, anyway, thanks to the panelists. Everyone was terrific. And thanks for coming.